In America's first national park, some visitors encountered horrors beyond imagination. Invisible killers lurking beneath innocent meadows, stampeding giants, and merciless forces of nature. These are the true stories of Yellowstone's deadliest encounters, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. It was September 6, 2015, in Yellowstone's backcountry. Overnight cooling and still air allowed carbon dioxide from a geothermal seep to settle inside a shallow meadow depression. By morning, the low-lying area held oxygen-displaced air, an invisible hazard unnoticed by most visitors. Marlon Jove, a 46-year-old office worker from Denver, had driven up specifically to photograph the park's lesser-known thermal features. His methodical personality and rule-following nature made him the type of person who researched locations thoroughly before visiting. He'd spent the previous evening studying geological survey maps, marking spots where mineral deposits indicated geothermal activity. This particular depression had caught his attention because of the colorful mineral staining visible along its damp edges. As someone who collected rocks as a hobby, he understood the significance of these formations. As other visitors gathered near the main trail to observe wildlife in the distance, Marlon stepped away from the designated path. His camera equipment hung around his neck as he carefully picked his way down the gentle slope toward the mineral deposits. Crossing beyond a rope boundary partially obscured by tall grass, marking the edge of a restricted thermal area that extended past the maintained trail. The morning remained windless, creating perfect conditions for photography, but also allowing heavier gases to settle and concentrate in low-lying areas without any air circulation to disperse them. The silence was almost complete, except for distant voices from the main trail. The depression appeared harmless enough, just a shallow bowl of grass and soil with interesting geological features. Marlon descended into the lowest section, focusing his camera on the orange and yellow mineral crusts that had formed where underground water seeped to the surface. What he couldn't detect was the invisible layer of carbon dioxide that had accumulated overnight, displacing the breathable air at ground level. The gas was odorless and colorless, making detection impossible without specialized equipment. Shortly after reaching the depression's floor, Marlon began experiencing dizziness and air hunger, as the oxygen-deficient air impaired his ability to remain upright. His camera slipped from his hands as his legs weakened, and within several minutes of exposure, he collapsed face down onto the damp soil, unable to regain his footing. The continued exposure prevented any possibility of recovery or self-rescue, as the toxic gas concentration remained lethal. The depression sat several yards below the main trail and was partially hidden by uneven terrain, leaving Marlon out of sight as other visitors continued their activities nearby, unaware of what had occurred. When park rangers responded to reports of an unresponsive visitor, they detected dangerously elevated carbon dioxide levels throughout the depression using specialized monitoring equipment. The area required natural ventilation before they could safely approach. Marlon was removed once conditions improved, but the prolonged oxygen deprivation had already proven fatal. Emergency medical personnel confirmed no vital signs upon arrival. The official investigation confirmed asphyxiation due to oxygen displacement by geothermal gases. No external injuries were found on his body. Rangers temporarily cordoned off the depression and added updated signage to the existing hazard warnings in their incident database. The case highlighted one of Yellowstone's most dangerous hazards, geothermal gas accumulation that provides no warning signs to those exposed. Investigators noted that once a person enters an oxygen-displaced pocket like this, collapse can occur before self-rescue is possible, making these incidents among the most lethal and unforgiving deaths recorded in the park. It was May 28, 2016, when the open grassland near the river crossing stretched under clear morning skies. The terrain rolled gently toward the water's edge, offering unobstructed views across several hundred yards of prairie. A mixed group of bison had gathered near the riverbank, including several cows with young calves that had drawn the attention of visitors scattered along the area's informal viewing spots. Daphne Krell, a 31-year-old freelance content creator from Portland, had arrived early to capture wildlife footage for her social media channels. Her confrontational personality and impulsive decision-making often led her to push boundaries that others respected. She carried professional camera equipment and had positioned herself closer to the herd than park guidelines recommended, seeking dynamic shots that would generate engagement online. As more visitors arrived and crowded forward to get better views of the calves, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Multiple people ignored the recommended 25-yard distance, with some advancing to within 50 feet of the animals. Daphne advanced to within roughly 10 to 15 feet of the animals, waving her arms and shouting to provoke movement that would create more compelling video content. The growing crowd had inadvertently surrounded portions of the herd, blocking natural escape routes. The herd's behavior became noticeably agitated as people continued pressing forward from multiple directions. Adult bison began positioning themselves between the visitors and their calves, a clear defensive posture that experienced wildlife watchers would recognize as a warning sign. The animals' ears flattened against their heads, and their tails lifted slightly, indicators of rising stress levels that went unnoticed by most of the crowd. When Daphne shouted and gestured more aggressively to elicit a reaction for her camera, a protective adult bison directly in front of her suddenly charged. The animal's explosive movement toward the river triggered panic among nearby bison, and within seconds, several bison reacted defensively, triggering a rapid chain response as nearby animals followed their movement. The partial herd response created a thunderous flow of bodies across the grassland. The ground vibrated under the collective weight of the charging animals. Daphne found herself directly in the path of the surging bison. The first animal struck her with tremendous force, knocking her to the ground before she could react. Multiple animals followed in rapid succession, their hooves and massive bodies passing over her prone form. The compressive trauma to her ribcage caused catastrophic internal injuries as the panicked bison continued moving without pause toward the water crossing. Other visitors scattered as the charge lasted only seconds, but the chaos it created left the area dangerous and disorganized long after the animals moved away. Park rangers responding to the incident immediately cleared the area and halted all foot traffic in the vicinity. Emergency medical personnel arrived within 20 minutes, but Daphne showed no signs of life when they reached her location. The official investigation determined that death resulted from compressive blunt force trauma, consistent with being trampled by large animals. Multiple witness statements confirmed that crowd behavior and deliberate provocation had initiated the charge and subsequent herd panic response. Rangers documented the incident as a preventable fatality caused by failure to maintain safe distances from wildlife. The case became part of ongoing educational efforts about proper wildlife viewing protocols in national parks. It was June 17, 2017, when the high-elevation Overlook Trail wound through exposed terrain at 8,200 feet above sea level. The morning had started with clear skies and mild temperatures in the mid-60s, but mountain weather systems can shift with little warning. Dark clouds began building over the western peaks as afternoon approached, bringing the threat of sudden temperature drops and precipitation that catch unprepared visitors off guard. The trail stretched for nearly 2 miles across an open ridgeline with minimal tree cover. Hollis Blinn, a 64-year-old retired warehouse supervisor from Phoenix, had joined a casual sightseeing group during a multi-day road tour through Yellowstone National Park. His sedentary lifestyle and weather-dismissive attitude often led him to underestimate outdoor conditions. He wore light cotton clothing suitable for valley temperatures, but inadequate for high-altitude exposure. His companions had suggested bringing warmer layers, but Hollis dismissed their concerns. The group reached the overlook just as conditions began deteriorating rapidly. Within a short period after reaching the overlook, temperatures plummeted more than 25 degrees as sleet began falling with increasing intensity. Wind gusts exceeding 40 miles per hour created wind chill factors that made conditions feel like the single digits. The exposed trail offered no natural shelter or windbreaks. As conditions worsened, Most visitors began retreating toward the parking area. Hollis initially kept pace, but his light clothing provided virtually no insulation. His body began losing heat rapidly from wet sleet soaking through the cotton fabric and chilling his skin directly. Hollis's pace began to slow as the cold affected his coordination. His body shivered violently, attempting to generate heat, but the mechanism proved insufficient against the severe wind chill. His responses became increasingly delayed and confused as his core temperature dropped. As exposure continued during the worsening storm, Hollis's condition deteriorated markedly. The prolonged cold overwhelmed his cardiovascular system. His shivering subsided, not from warming but from muscular exhaustion and advancing hypothermia. His speech became slurred, and his movements uncoordinated as brain function became impaired. Hollis exhibited paradoxical calm and confusion, common in severe hypothermia. He stopped complaining about the cold and insisted he felt fine, showing confusion and impaired judgment as his hypothermia advanced. His judgment had become severely compromised. He lagged further behind, stumbling frequently on the slippery trail. Later along the descent from the overlook, near a bend approximately 200 yards down the trail, Hollis collapsed onto the rocky path. The combination of hypothermia and exhaustion had overwhelmed his system. His heart rhythm became increasingly irregular, ultimately leading to a fatal cardiac arrhythmia triggered by the severe hypothermic stress. His companions realized he was missing and began searching back along the trail. However, deteriorating conditions forced them to seek shelter and contact park authorities. Rangers equipped with cold weather gear reached Hollis's location after the storm passed several hours later. The official investigation confirmed death from acute hypothermia, leading to cardiac arrest. Weather station data supported the timeline and severity, with recorded wind chills reaching the low single digits. Medical examination revealed no traumatic injuries, confirming that environmental exposure was the sole cause. Investigators noted that the rapid weather shift, exposed terrain, and lack of shelter created life-threatening conditions within a short window, placing this incident among the most severe weather-related deaths recorded in Yellowstone. It was August 9, 2018, when the forested maintenance corridor stretched through a dense stand of lodgepole pine trees showing extensive beetle damage. The narrow access road wound between towering dead and dying trees, many standing at precarious angles after years of insect infestation had weakened their root systems. Wind gusts had been increasing throughout the morning, creating an ominous creaking sound as the compromised trees swayed overhead. The corridor served as a critical access route for forest management operations and was already known among park crews as one of the most dangerous sections due to widespread beetle-killed timber. Tegan Vox, a 24-year-old seasonal maintenance worker, had been assigned to survey and mark hazardous trees along the corridor for future removal. Her quiet demeanor and safety-focused approach made her well-suited for identifying potential dangers in the forest environment. She carried marking tape and a clipboard, methodically documenting each tree that posed a risk to vehicles or personnel using the maintenance road. This was her second season working in forest management, and she had developed a keen eye for structural weaknesses in damaged timber common throughout Yellowstone's beetle-impacted forests. The beetle-killed lodgepole pine she approached stood approximately 60 feet tall with visible root damage, where the soil had eroded around its base. Previous storms had loosened the root plate, leaving the massive tree held upright primarily by surrounding vegetation and unstable soil. Tegan marked it with bright orange tape and noted its location on her survey form, planning to recommend immediate removal. The tree showed classic signs of advanced deterioration that made it a priority hazard. As wind speeds increased through the corridor, the damaged tree reached a point of imminent failure, despite no reliable warning signs that would have allowed safe retreat. The root system, already compromised by years of beetle damage and soil erosion, could no longer support the weight of the trunk against the lateral wind forces. The ground around the base showed fresh cracks where the root plate was beginning to separate from the surrounding earth. Small debris began falling from the canopy as the wind intensified. Without warning, the tree's root system failed completely. The massive lodgepole pine, weighing several thousand pounds, toppled directly toward Tegan's position. She had no time to react or move to safety, as the failure occurred within seconds once the root system gave way. The tree struck her across the upper body and head, causing immediate and catastrophic crush injuries to her skull and cervical spine. The impact was instantly fatal, with the weight of the falling timber causing severe trauma that would have resulted in immediate unconsciousness and death. No secondary impacts or additional injuries occurred, as the tree came to rest in its final position across the maintenance corridor, completely blocking vehicle access. Tegan's co-workers became concerned when she failed to respond to radio check-ins scheduled throughout the day. A search team located her body beneath the fallen tree several hours later. Emergency responders confirmed that death had occurred immediately upon impact, with no possibility of survival given the severity of the crush injuries. The official investigation determined that death resulted from massive blunt force trauma caused by the falling lodgepole pine. Examination of the failed root system showed that beetle damage and soil erosion had left the tree structurally unstable under wind stress. The maintenance corridor was closed for hazard tree removal, and follow-up inspections identified additional compromised trees along the same stretch. As a result, solo work was suspended in beetle-killed corridors until entire sections could be reassessed. It was October 3, 2016, when a narrow park road inside Yellowstone National Park wound through mountainous terrain with steep drop-offs and minimal safety barriers. Recent autumn rains had saturated the soil along the roadway, creating unstable conditions where the pavement met the natural shoulder. The two-lane road featured several sharp curves with limited visibility, requiring drivers to navigate carefully around blind corners, where oncoming traffic could appear suddenly. Construction budget limitations had prevented the installation of guardrails along many sections of Yellowstone's older park roads. Roscoe Drant, a 52-year-old commercial delivery driver from Denver, had taken a personal day to explore the scenic mountain roads alone. His mechanically confident personality and years of professional driving experience made him comfortable handling challenging road conditions. He drove a mid-sized pickup truck and had been traveling at moderate speeds while taking in the autumn scenery during his solo sightseeing trip through the area. His familiarity with mountain driving had given him perhaps too much confidence in navigating difficult terrain. As Roscoe approached a particularly narrow curve with no guardrail protection, he encountered oncoming traffic that required him to move toward the right edge of the roadway. The pavement narrowed significantly at this point, leaving little margin for error between vehicles. Recent rainfall had softened the unpaved shoulder, creating a deceptive surface that appeared stable beneath the loose gravel and vegetation. When Roscoe pulled his vehicle to the right to allow the approaching car to pass safely, his right tires moved off the paved surface onto the rain-softened shoulder. The saturated soil immediately began giving way under the weight of the truck, causing the right side to sink and tilt toward the embankment. The soft ground provided no traction for the tires to regain purchase, leaving no viable opportunity for recovery once the shoulder collapsed. The vehicle's momentum and unstable shoulder caused it to tip beyond its center of gravity. Within seconds, the pickup truck began rolling down the steep embankment adjacent to the roadway. The truck completed more than one rotation as it descended the 22-foot slope, gaining speed as it tumbled through loose soil and scattered rocks. During the violent rollover, the driver's side window shattered on first impact. Despite wearing his seatbelt, the violent rotation of the vehicle and deformation of the cab caused his body to rotate within the restraint, allowing his upper torso to shift toward the shattered window opening. The truck's roof and frame collapsed under repeated impacts. As the vehicle continued rolling, Roscoe was partially ejected through the shattered window opening, as the collapsing door frame created a fatal intrusion point. His torso extended outside the crushed cab, while his lower body remained partially restrained by the compromised belt. When the vehicle came to rest on its side at the bottom, Roscoe was pinned beneath the crushed cab section, with the full weight of the truck compressing his torso and causing massive internal injuries. The passing motorist who had been involved in the initial traffic encounter stopped and called emergency services immediately after witnessing the rollover. First responders arrived within 25 minutes but required specialized equipment to lift the vehicle and extract Roscoe from beneath it. Medical personnel confirmed that the crush injuries had been immediately fatal. The official accident investigation documented tire marks showing where the vehicle had left the pavement and the trajectory of the rollover down the embankment. Investigators determined that death resulted from compressive crush injuries sustained when the victim became trapped beneath the overturned vehicle. The soft shoulder was subsequently reinforced, and warning signs were installed at that location. Investigators later cited the crash as one of the most severe roadway fatalities in Yellowstone, highlighting how narrow roads, soft shoulders, and missing guardrails could turn routine driving decisions into deadly outcomes. It was July 21, 2015, when the dry meadow stretched along the margin of an ancient river plain, where subsurface geothermal activity had thinned the surface crust, allowing near-boiling water and superheated mud to erode the soil from below. The area appeared deceptively solid at surface level, with healthy grass growth masking the thermal erosion beneath. Faint discoloration in patches of vegetation and occasional wisps of steam from small ground vents hinted at the geothermal features below. But these warning signs were easily overlooked by casual observers unfamiliar with such volcanic plateau hazards. 9-year-old Vina Swale had accompanied her family on a wildlife viewing excursion to observe animals that frequently grazed in the meadow area. Her energetic personality and natural curiosity often led her to explore beyond the immediate vicinity of the adults. The family had positioned themselves at a safe distance to watch a small herd of elk feeding in the distance, their attention focused on the animals through binoculars and cameras. Vina had been playing quietly nearby while her parents and older siblings concentrated on the wildlife photography opportunity. The meadow's surface showed signs of subsurface instability that had developed gradually from thermal activity. Underground geothermal processes had weakened the soil and formed a shallow cavity filled with superheated mud and steam beneath what appeared to be solid ground. The grass-covered surface provided a thin crust that concealed these dangerous voids. Patches of slightly yellowed grass and areas where the ground felt unusually warm marked the hazardous zone, though the area lay just beyond a poorly enforced boundary zone where warning signage was sparse and difficult to see from ground level. While the adults remained focused on photographing the distant wildlife, Vina wandered toward a particularly green patch of grass approximately 30 yards away. The lush vegetation had attracted her attention, and she moved away from the group without the adults immediately noticing her departure. The ground appeared completely stable from surface observation. As Vina stepped onto the seemingly solid grass-covered area, the thin crust of soil and vegetation could not support her weight. The ground collapsed suddenly beneath her feet, creating an opening several feet wide over the geothermal cavity. She fell through the surface into a shallow geothermal cavity, approximately 8 feet below ground level, where near-boiling mud, steam, and unstable rock compounded the fall. The collapse happened so quickly that she had no opportunity to call out or grab onto anything for support. Vina landed in superheated mud and collapsed rock at the bottom of the cavity. The combination of severe scalding and impact trauma caused catastrophic injuries as she struck the hard surfaces below. The confined space, extreme heat, and severity of her injuries made survival impossible from the moment of collapse. When the adults realized Vina was missing from the group, they began searching the immediate area and discovered the fresh ground collapse. Emergency responders were contacted immediately, but the remote location meant that specialized rescue equipment took considerable time to arrive. Rangers and rescue personnel worked to safely extract Vina from the underground cavity once they reached the scene several hours later. The official investigation confirmed that death resulted from severe thermal injuries sustained after the ground collapse, with contributing blunt trauma from the fall into the geothermal cavity. Geological assessment revealed widespread thermal erosion that had created multiple thin crust zones capable of collapsing without warning, identifying the area as one of Yellowstone's most lethal geothermal hazards. Temporary fencing was installed around the collapse site, and the area was marked for a comprehensive geothermal survey to identify other potential hazards where thermal activity had undermined the soil. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.